lifted up joy. Listen and gather round me, children, children of a mother whose life lifted up hope. A mother who taught all of her children to love and be loved by each other. Hold your sister's hand as she walks across life and look out for each other. Carry your brother's load. Don't you ever, ever betray him. Go to the store, buy grandmama a pound of Listen and gather round me, children, children of a mother whose life lifted up love. Listen, gather round me, children, children of a mother whose life lifted up hope. A mother who taught all of her children to love and be loved by each other. Hold your baby sister's hand and walk through life, then look out for each other. Carry your brother's load. Don't you ever, ever betray him. Go to the store, buy grandmama a pound of love. Thank you all for welcoming me to your family, your church family here this morning. And thank you, Reverend Hardies, for inviting me to speak to you all this Mother's Day. It's definitely an honor to be with friends, some old and some new. As Sophia said, I am from London, so I have an accent, although my parents think I'm losing it being here, so maybe you couldn't tell. I also, as Sophia mentioned, I'm a proctor in the college, so I walked over through the yard where I live in the dorms with the freshmen, keeping watch over them, some of whom are here today. So I wanted to welcome them and give a special shout out for making it to church during finals. So your reward is in heaven. My reading is about a foremother in the Judeo-Christian tradition that we don't usually hear about, and her name is Hagar, and her story can be found in Genesis chapter 16. And it reads, Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, Hagar began to despise her mistress. Your slave is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert and said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, Go back to your mistress and submit to her. I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are El Roi, the God who sees me. The first class I took at Harvard Divinity School was Religion and Liberation in the works of Toni Morrison and Gabriel Garcia Marquez with Professor Carrasco, or Profe as we would call him. And usually we would begin a new class by going around the room and introducing ourselves. But Profe, to my surprise, asked us instead to introduce one of our grandmothers to the class, to say her name, the languages she spoke, and perhaps her favorite book if we knew it. And I thought of my father's mother, Cynthia from the island of Curacao in the Caribbean. She was part of the Windrush generation that emigrated to England in the 50s and spoke Dutch, Spanish, French, and her local dialect, Papiamento, and she taught my dad none of these, which grieves me. I imagined her favorite book would be the Bible because I know she used it to teach my dad and his brothers how to read. One by one, each student went around and introduced their grandmother to the class, and then Profe said, "We have now brought our ancestors into the room." In a world where it can be tempting to think that we've arrived on our own strength or merit to a place, especially a place like Harvard, it was grounding to begin my time there, acknowledging that we're all standing on the shoulders of those that have come before us. And I've been thinking about how true this is in a spiritual sense also, the spiritual forefathers and foremothers that ground us in our respective traditions, some known and some less known. As a preacher's kid, I grew up singing songs about Father Abraham and his many sons, but little about Mother Sarah and nothing at all about Mother Hagar, the Egyptian slave woman of Abraham and Sarah. She enters the narrative as a solution to a problem, a forced surrogate for God's chosen couple, who, as you can see, don't fare very well in this story. The language used in the narrative mimics that of another foundational couple in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Eve took some of the fruit and ate and gave it to her husband. Sarai took her slave and gave to her husband, Abram. Except in this case, this was not fruit, this was a woman. A flesh and blood young woman with her own hopes, fears, dreams, things we know very little of from the narrative. Renita Weems, a biblical scholar and minister, says that we ought to listen for the untold story. And there is so much more I want to know about Hagar, the woman. In fact, Abraham and Sarah never once even refer to Hagar by name. She is simply slave girl. Oppressed, mistreated, and now pregnant, Hagar flees to the wilderness, and it's in the wilderness that she will find the divine. Or, more accurately, the divine will find her. Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? When God asks people questions in the Bible, I've come to realize they're usually for their sake more than for his. Before Hagar can move forward, she has to acknowledge where she is and where she started. This divine being acknowledges her situation, that she is a slave of Sarai, and in the same breath affirms her humanity. And most importantly, calls her by name. Names are important. For the last year, I've worked as a tour guide, as was said, for the Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery. And while we're accustomed to seeing the names of prominent figures in Harvard's history around Cambridge, like Brattle on Brattle Street or Agassiz on the side of the Peabody Museum, we won't see the names of the individuals enslaved by them and staff and faculty between the 17th and 18th centuries, whose own forced labor helped create the Harvard that we know today. Caesar, Dinah, Titus, Agnes, Cicely, George. Names on the tour that we speak over the lands upon which they worked, although I've always had a feeling that the land knows them intimately. And I know this congregation has been doing its own work with the legacy of slavery in Cambridge, in particular with listening for the untold story of Cicely, who was buried next door in the old Cambridge burial ground, for which I thank you. Now I have to confess that when I was putting this sermon together, which I first delivered at the Divinity School a couple of weeks ago, I felt real trepidation as an international student that is here on a visa about the things I could say and not say, as we're seeing real consequences about the names that are being said or not said, or the humanities that are being affirmed or not affirmed today. In this story, we see the first appearance of the angel of the Lord in the Bible to a person. And it's not to Noah or Abraham or Moses, but to one whose own humanity was denied, an Egyptian slave woman who God knows by name. Some Christian scholars have argued that if Hagar did indeed see God as a physical presence, then this could be read as a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. And I like to think that just as Jesus chose to appear first after his resurrection to Mary Magdalene, a formerly demon-possessed woman, then it's fitting for this first appearance of a pre-incarnate Christ to be to another woman dwelling on the margins. Perhaps it is empowered by this, Hagar will go on to give this God she encounters a name. And she is in fact the only character in the Bible to give God a name. And she calls him El Roi, the God who sees me. The year before I came to the divinity school, I was working as a youth minister in Moldova, a small country in Eastern Europe that borders Romania and Ukraine. And I lived right by the Ukrainian border when the war started. And I have vivid memories of waiting in the lobby at night to welcome people as truck after truck pulled up with Ukrainians who had suddenly found themselves refugees overnight. Mothers, fathers, children, babies, even pets. Moldova is one of the smallest countries, but they took in over 100,000 Ukrainians. And in the days that followed, I would take some of the teenagers into the town center. And as we got nearer, we started to see handwritten signs in the windows of restaurants and cafes. Some were even written in Ukrainian. And they said, "Welcome. You are safe here." Or my favorite, "Free lunch for Ukrainians," which usually meant free lunch for me too. It was moving to see their eyes light up, that their presence was not just being tolerated, but welcomed. The name Hagar means in Hebrew, sojourner or foreigner. I'm not sure if this was the name she was given at birth by her mother, but in this she comes to represent all foreigners, all outsiders, all those deemed the other. And in calling God El Roi, she affirms that God sees the outsider. For feminist biblical scholar Phyllis Tribble, she writes that the story of Hagar is a text of terror, one you won't usually hear preached from a pulpit on a Sunday. Something I've learned in my 3 years as a student is that sacred texts can be used both to terrorize and to liberate. The same text, in fact, can be used to instill fear and terror as much as to instill hope and freedom. It all depends on the lens of the one wielding it. Taking the two greatest commandments of Jesus to love God and neighbor as the foundation for his interpretation, Augustine said, "Whoever thinks that he understands the Holy Scriptures, or any part of them, but puts such an interpretation upon them that does not tend to build up this twofold love of God and our neighbor, does not yet understand them as he ought." The book that follows Genesis is Exodus, in which we will see a reversal take place, as it will be the Hebrews, the descendants of Abraham and Sarah, that are brutally enslaved by the Egyptians and in need of being seen, in need of a liberator. Our freedoms are all intertwined with one another. God himself will go on to command his people in Deuteronomy, "Love the foreigner, since you yourselves were foreigners in the land of Egypt." What I've come to appreciate about the story of Hagar is that it hasn't been hidden in the biblical text, as we often do in history, with stories that don't fit the preferred narrative, or stories that don't make the heroes shine. Hagar was not part of this chosen people, but as Howard Thurman would say, she too is a child of God. And she is sought out and provided for by him. She's given a promise of descendants and a lineage similar to the one given to Abraham, but in her own right. Hagar will go on to be one of the central figures in womanist theology, a mother for the marginalized and all those that might see themselves as the other in the story. In the spirit of listening for the untold story, I wrote a poem from the perspective of Hagar that I titled El Roi and I, and it ended like this. "At desert edge, at death's edge, I found you, beneath harsh Beersheba sun. God of promised land and of desert, God of abundance and of famine, God of the chosen and half chosen, God of the full and of the empty. Though unseen by man, you see me. Though unseen by man, I see you. Adam named animals, I will name God. El Roi and I, we through wilderness run." May we remember those that have come before us, the forefathers and especially foremothers physical and spiritual, whose shoulders we stand on. May we not dismay when we find ourselves in a season of wilderness, as often we may be on the cusp of a divine encounter. And in the spirit of El Roy, may we, in our communities and as individuals, always have eyes to see the outsider, to have hanging in our windows, "You are welcome here," regardless of the messaging that's in our world, because we never know when it may be us in need of that welcome. And in honor of Mother's Day, may we see and cherish the mothers in our lives, whether by blood or by love. May we see and cherish those that have lost a mother. May we see and cherish those that long to be mothers, and all those that might feel a particular ache on this day. The message of Hagar is that you are seen by God.